Hi, my name is Kevin Deitz, and I'm a professional jazz and classical bass player, and I'm a composer and an arranger, and I'm a music educator. So I actually started playing music about 1968. I started on the violin, playing in the school orchestra, but I had an older brother who played in rock bands. He played guitar and bass, and he wanted somebody to jam with, so he showed me a few things on the electric bass, and I was off and running, at least playing by ear. So from there I started jamming with friends in middle school, playing in pretty bad garage band type rock bands. And then from there I started jamming with some of the jazz musicians in my school. So what I realized is that the chord changes and the music was just a lot more complicated in jazz, and so I would need some knowledge in order to be able to really play it. So my friend Scott Stickley was a trumpet player, and he loaned me a music theory book, and I started grinding through it. I have to say that I didn't understand a lot of it, but at least I got started and I realized what I didn't know. So I'd quit the violin by this time, but I was starting to realize the string bass was used more in jazz than electric bass, well, at least at that time. So I started going into the orchestra room at lunch and fumbling around on the string bass. So my old orchestra teacher saw me in there playing one day, and he said, "Hey, if you join orchestra, I'll give you some free lessons to get you going." So I thought that would be a great deal. So that's exactly what I did. So by now I joined the jazz band at school, and I was back in orchestra, and I realized that I wanted to be a professional bass player. So I really started practicing, probably a minimum of 2 hours a day. And by the end of high school, I played well enough to pass the audition for the U of O School of Music. So from there, after going there for a year, I transferred to North Texas State University in Denton, and I ran out of money. I went back to the U of O, and I was playing lots of local gigs in Eugene. I eventually met my wife at school, and she was offered a music teaching job in Portland, so we moved there. And I still gigged a lot and decided to get a music ed degree at Portland State. So from there, I taught string orchestra in the Tigard-Tualatin District for about 3 years, and then I was offered a job teaching string bass, primarily at Willamette University, which I did for 11 years. After that, I was offered jobs at Lewis and Clark College and Reed College, and I taught private students from Mount Hood and Clackamas Community College. Eventually, Clackamas offered more hours, so I let go of the other schools. But during that time, I was still playing all kinds of gigs. I was playing everything from Broadway shows to recording sessions to jazz gigs, concerts with famous jazz and pop artists that came through town. I played with the Portland Opera. I was doing gigs with my own band, playing my own original music. So now 40 years later, things have really changed. So it's shut down. And it's not a great time for anyone who's in the performing arts. Well, thankfully, I'm still teaching, so we're going to be fine, but I'm definitely looking forward to things returning back to normal. So I'm going to play a couple things here for you on the bass, but I want to tell you a little bit about this instrument. It was built about in 1850, and it's Tyrolean, so that was where the border of Italy and Switzerland was, at least back in 1850. I guess the border moved quite a bit during the 1800s. And so that means it's about 160 years old. So if you look really closely, you can see it has a lot of cracks in it. On the sides, on the top, it's actually been repaired quite a lot. It was restored at one point in its life, taken completely apart and reinforced because it was just falling apart. I suppose you would too if you were 160 years old. But what's different about this instrument compared to my other instruments, my more modern instruments, is on the neck here, if you actually run your finger along the back of the neck here, you can feel little indentations where all of the bass players over the past 160 years place their thumb. It's just like a little ripply, a bunch of little hills here on the back of the neck, and none of my other basses have that, of course, because none of them are nearly this old. Another kind of interesting feature about the bass is it's got an extension on it, and these are gates here. And if you know anything about the capo on a guitar, it's kind of like that. You take the capo and you put it at a certain fret, and it changes the tuning of the guitar. And this essentially just gives me some extra low notes on the E string of this instrument. So it's in half step, so if you know anything about music, I can lift this gate, and this E string goes down to an E flat, down a half step. If I lift the next gate, it goes down to a D. If I I lift the next gate, it goes down to a D flat, and if I lift the next gate, it goes down to a low C. Now this is a little bit more common in orchestral music, but still it's totally usable in jazz, and you can actually play back on the extension too. You can finger these notes. Or, it's pretty low, it's kind of hard to hear, but it's actually fun to be able to play that low sometimes. So I'm just going to play a little blues for you here. I'll play a walking bass line through once, and then I'll solo through that, and then wrap it up, just so you hear what the instrument sounds like.